Stage 1. Barter, 9000 BC. There was a time when nobody paid for food or goods. They traded them. No coins, no bills, just a direct swap. Your livestock for his grain. Around 9000 BCE, in the valley between the Tigris and the Euphrates, people first began to plow the land and keep herds instead of hunting. Harvests depended on the season, so one family would end up with a surplus of grain, another with wool or pots. Trading those surpluses stopped being a choice and became a necessity. That's how the first system of settlement in history was born, without a single coin. You can see it most clearly in the temple economies of Sumer. Priests kept track of grain and cattle on clay tablets, recording who owed what to whom. A farmer could hand the temple part of his harvest and receive, in return, the right to use an ox to plow his field the following season. Nobody paid with money. Instead, the two sides simply recorded that one good was worth a certain amount of another. Those tablets were, in effect, the world's first accounting. Except instead of numbers on a screen, it was clay and a stick. Thousands of years before the first coins, people already knew how to keep score of debt. But barter didn't work the same way with everyone. With neighbors and relatives, people shared the harvest freely, without counting or trading. With strangers from another settlement, they haggled over every last grain, because there was no trust. The trouble started when the thing you needed wasn't in the hands of the person who needed what you had. A farmer wanted an axe, but the blacksmith had no use for grain. He wanted fish. The larger settlements grew, the more often deals simply fell through. Cities needed a way to trade that didn't depend on what the other person happened to want right now. Stage 2. Commodity money, 1200 BC. Barter worked fine, right up until you had to find that one person with that one thing. So people came up with something simpler. Pick a single object that everyone wants and trade everything through it. Around 1200 BC in China, under the Shang dynasty, that object became the cowrie shell. They were brought in from the southern seas, hundreds of kilometers from the capital, and deep inland, these small, glossy shells were simply impossible to find. Rarity came paired with convenience, light, durable, uniform in size, easy to carry, and easy to count on a string. Those qualities turned an ordinary seashell into the first mass currency of an enormous territory. At the Shang court, cowries paid for goods, rewarded officials, and were presented as tribute. Archaeologists find them in the tombs of the nobility in whole bundles, threaded onto cords, a sign of how high the dead had stood in life. A farmer could trade a string of cowries for grain or cloth, exactly the way people would later pay with coins. Over time, the practice spread far beyond China, all the way to the coast of West Africa, where similar shells were still in use in the 20th century. This currency even left its mark on language. The character for the cowrie shell still appears inside Chinese characters tied to money, wealth, and trade. 3,000 years after the shells themselves went out of circulation. But shell money had an obvious ceiling. There simply weren't enough real cowries to go around, and counterfeits appeared fast. Look-alike shells first, then imitations carved from bone and cast in bronze. If any craftsman could fake the currency, could it stay reliable at all? Stage 3. Coins, 600 BC. The first coin in history wasn't struck by a bank or a merchant. It was struck by a king who wanted his mark riding in the pocket of every person in his country. Before that, money was lumps of metal, weighed and eyeballed at every single transaction. Around 600 BC in Lydia, a kingdom in what is now western Turkey, a king named Alyattes ruled. The local rivers carried electrum, a natural alloy of gold and silver, and Lydia turned out to be one of the most metal-rich territories in the Mediterranean. Trade in the region was growing, and weighing every ingot and checking its purity at every deal had become far too slow. Alyattes needed money that could be recognized at a glance. The solution was simple. Ingots of electrum, all of the same weight, were stamped with a special mark, the image of a lion, the symbol of royal power. Every such coin was a guarantee from the state. Its weight and its composition had been verified in advance, and forging it counted as treason against the king. A merchant no longer had to weigh metal on the spot. He just had to see the stamp and count the coins. This became the first monetary system in history backed not by trust between neighbors, but by the seal of a state. That trust, though, didn't arrive overnight. The earliest coins still had no fixed denomination, so people kept weighing them anyway, and even bit down on them to make sure there wasn't cheap metal hiding inside. Coins solved the problem of debasement and weight, but not the problem of bulk. Paying for a large deal in 100 coins was awkward, and hauling chests of silver halfway across the country was outright dangerous. Money had to get lighter. Stage 4, paper money, 1024. Carrying coins halfway across the country was heavy and risky, so one state decided, let money weigh no more than a sheet of paper. In 1024, the imperial administration of Song China officially issued jiaozi, the world's first state-issued paper money. The push came from Sichuan province, where the currency in circulation was awkward iron coinage. Enough of it for a major purchase weighed several kilograms. Local money changers had already been handing merchants receipts in place of the heavy metal, and the authorities decided to take that system under their own control and print money in the name of the state. 2 centuries later, a Venetian merchant named Marco Polo saw the system with his own eyes at the court of Kublai Khan. He described officials printing banknotes from the bark of the mulberry tree, stamping them with the state seal, and forcing traders to accept these sheets of paper on par with gold, on pain of death for refusing. Marco Polo admitted that nobody in Europe would believe it. Ordinary paper that, by the emperor's order, was worth as much as precious metal. To a medieval European, it looked close to sorcery. The temptation, though, had taken hold of the Chinese authorities long before Marco Polo arrived. As early as the 11th century, officials began printing more notes than there was silver in the treasury to back them, and the country got one of the first documented inflations in history. Paper solved the problem of weight, but it created a new one. Trust now rested not on the metal in your pocket, but on a promise from a government that could break it at any moment. What happens when the seal of the state stops guaranteeing anything at all? Stage 5. Electronic money, 1950. In 1950, New York businessman Frank McNamara was having dinner at Major's Cabin Grill when he realized he'd left his wallet in another suit. He had to call his wife to come and pay, and the embarrassment of that evening stayed with him. Together with his partner, a lawyer named Ralph Schneider, McNamara came up with a way to pay for dinner without a single coin or bill in your pocket, a card that several restaurants had agreed in advance to accept. That's how Diners Club appeared. The scheme was simple. The cardholder signed a slip at the restaurant. The restaurant got its money from Diners Club minus a small fee, and at the end of the month, the customer received one combined bill for every restaurant visit at once. At first, only 14 establishments in New York accepted the card, most of them near the company's office. But within a year, around 10,000 people were using it. And restaurants agreed to Diners Club's terms one after another, rather than lose the customers who carried it. And the first credit card in history wasn't plastic at all. It was cardboard. It wore out quickly in a wallet, and the company had to reissue it every year for every single holder. From that point on, money started shedding its physical form faster than ever. The card was followed by ATMs, magnetic stripes, and eventually payments made with a single tap of a phone. Is there anything left in money that you can actually touch, or is all that's ahead a line in somebody else's database? In 70 years, money went from a cardboard card to Bitcoin, a currency with no bank, no state, and no seal guaranteeing its value. In 2009, you could create it on an ordinary home computer. And today, some countries are already testing digital money of their own, issued by their central banks. If the value of money has always rested on people's trust, who exactly will we be trusting once money no longer belongs to any state at all?